A nation on the brink of bankruptcy. An economy in a meltdown. Sri Lanka, a country of 22 million people, once referred to as a tropical island paradise, is in free fall.
This certainly is the worst economic crisis we have faced during this century and last century.
It's going to be a long-lasting, drawn-out crisis, and we really have to prepare for that.
Sri Lanka has defaulted on all foreign debts. Its access to international financial markets has been cut off. The rupee's gone into a tailspin, and there's spiraling inflation. Cities and towns are submerged in darkness for hours with no fuel to produce electricity. Cooking gas, medicine, milk powder and other essential commodities are short in supply.
එදිනෙදා ඇත්තටම ජීවත් වෙන්න බෑ දැන්. එක වේලක් කෑවොත් ඊළඟ වේල කොහොමද කන්නේ කියලා අපි කල්පනා කරන්න ඕනේ.
Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and his entire cabinet have resigned. Veteran politician Ranil Wickremasinghe has just taken over as the new Prime Minister. Can he steer the country's sinking ship to safer shores? How could a nation slide into disaster and chaos so fast?
Worst crisis in post-colonial history.
Sri Lanka defaults on foreign debt.
Rice and milk shortages. Foreign exchange reserves
crash.
Prices of food and medicines rise.
Protests erupt on the streets.
Government confesses to mistake.
Anti-government protesters vow to bring country to
New government faces mountain of debt.
Famine looms.
Another day in the life of Gayan Palita. He returns home after spending long hours in a petrol station queue. When he runs out of fuel, he pushes his three-wheeler over 2 kilometers to the densely populated part of Colombo where he lives. Gayan's home in Narayanpeta is a 4-meter by 3-meter space shared with his wife, Sri Lanka Pushpakumari, and their 2 children. As it has been happening over the last few weeks, Gayan doesn't have any encouraging news to share with his wife this evening.
පෙට්‍රල් ගා ගන්න පුළුවන් වුණාද?
පෙට්‍රල් ටික ගහගත්තාද දවසම පොලිමේ ඉඳලා දවස් දුවා ගන්නත් විදියක් නැහැ.
එන හිටවත් උදේ ඉඳලා දුවා ගන්න වෙන්නේ ඊතාරු ගෙදර අඩුපාඩුත් තියෙනවා ඉස්කෝලේ පොත් ටිකක් ගන්නත් තියෙනවා. ඔක්කොටම වැඩි හෙට ලෝන් එක ගෙවා ගන්නත් ඕනේ නේ.
බලමු ඉතින් හෙටවත් ඉතින් 6 10ක් 15ක් හොයාගත්තොත් මොන හරි ගේමක් ගා ගන්න පුළුවන් නැත්නම් ඉතින් මොකක් හරි කරන්න වෙනවා. අය අක්කගෙන්වත් ඉල්ල.
ගිය සැරේත් මම නිල්ලුවේ මේ සැරේ ඔයා පොඩ්ඩක් අහලා බලන්න.
හරි බලමු ඉතින් මොන හරි කරමු මොකක් හරි කරගන්නත් බෑ.
Life has been hard, but not as bad as now. 33-year-old Sri Lanka is a tailor who earned a decent income to get by even 2 years ago. She also worked as a cleaner and cook in affluent homes. The 34-year-old Gayan made enough money by ferrying passengers in his 3-wheeler to supplement Sri Lanka's income. The couple also had dreams of setting up a tailoring business and improving their economic condition. Then the pandemic struck and Sri Lanka's income dried up.
උයන්න ගෙවල් ලස් කරන්න ඒ වගේ තැන් වලට ගියා. ඉතින් දැන් ඒව වලිනුත් ගන්න නැහැ. ඇත්තටම දැන් මේ කොරෝනා හැදුනට පස්සේ ගොඩක් ගෙවල් වලින් නැවතුවා. ඉතුරු කරගත්ත සල්ලි වගේක් තිබ්බා. ඒ වයි රත්තරන් බඩුවේ ওই ටික තියලා ජීවත් වුණා. ජීවත් වෙලා වයිෆ් ඇවිල්ලා ඇඳුම් ගෙනල්ලා කොට්ටෝ උර ඔය එක එක බෙඩ් සීට් අනම්මනම් මහා විකුණුවා. ඒ ඉතුරු කරගත්ත සල්ලි වලින්. දැන් ඉතින් රෙදි කෑල්ලක් ගන්න පුළුවන්ද? රෙදි කෑල්ලක් අරන් බිස්නස් එකක් කරන්න පුළුවන්ද? බෑ. ඒ තිබ්බ සල්ලිත් ඔක්කොම ඉවරයි කොරෝනා කාලේ. හරි කොරෝනා ඉවරලා ඔලු උස්සයි කියලා හිතුවා. ඒකත් නැහනේ.
In a matter of weeks, the life that the hard-working couple was trying to build came crashing down. The fuel shortage means Gayan's income has become a fraction of what he earned earlier. He has to queue up for hours to get fuel. And sometimes, even the long hours spent in the queue are wasted. He can hardly make 20,000 rupees or $55 a month now, whereas he could earn 50,000 rupees or $138 on an average earlier.
අපි තෙල් ටික ගහන්න ඉන්න ඕන පැය 3-4 පෝලිං වල. ඉඳලා අපි කීයක්ද හොයාගන්නේ? දැන් තියෙන තෙල් මිල බලන්න. දිනෙන් දිනට ඉහළ යනවා තෙල් මිල. අපි කොහොමද මෙහෙම ජීවත් වෙන්නේ?
Living becomes even more difficult when cooking fuel is in short supply. When a cooking gas cylinder runs dry, Sri Lanka tries her best to shake out the last traces of gas from the cylinder. She has to cook meals for the family, and she knows she might not get a refill anytime soon. The queues at gas cylinder stations are long. Without gas, she has to cook meals using firewood in a confined space. It's challenging and hazardous, but she has no choice. It's not as if they can go to a nearby eatery and order food. First, those eateries are closed. Second, they cannot afford the meals.
ඇත්තටම දැන් ඉතින් අපි ගෑස් පෝලිං වලට ගිහිල්ලා ඉන්නවා. ඉටියට වැඩක් නැහැ. සමහරක් වෙලාවට ඒ කට්ටිය කියනවා ටෝකන් වලට දෙන්න කියලා. අපි උදේ ඉඳන් ඉඳලා එනවා සමහරක් වෙලාවට. ඒ ආවට පස්සේ ඉතින් උයා ගන්න ඇත්තටම මේ පොඩි ගෙවල් වල ඇත්තටම උයන්න බෑ. මොකද මේවා පැල්පත් නිවාස. මේවා එළියට ගිහිල්ලා උයන්නත් බෑ. එළියේ තියාගෙන උයා ගන්නත් බෑ. මාරම වදයක් විදින්න ඇත්තටම අපි. හෝටලයකින් කන්න ඉතින් දැන් තියෙන ආර්ථික තත්ත්වය අනුව කොහොමද කරන්නේ? එක බතක් හරි එක හොද්දක් හරි හදාගෙන ඉතින් කන්න වෙලා තියෙන්නේ ඉතින් ගෙදර හරි. මොකද හෝටල් වලින් කන්න බෑ. දැන් රයිස් එකක් ගන්න පුළුවන්. රුපියල් 700කට 800කට යහින් රයිස් එකක් ගන්න බෑ. ඒ අරන් කොහොමද අපි කන්නේ?
It's 10 o'clock at night in Colombo, but most residents on this impoverished colony are out on the streets. They cannot stay indoors when the blackouts happen, and they often happen these days. Their 1.5 room living quarters turn into a virtual furnace in the summer heat.
සමහරක් වෙලාවට පැය 12 කපනවා. පැය 12ක් කියන්නේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් මේ වගේ දුප්පත් පැල්පත් වල මිනිස්සු ජීවත් වෙද්දී මේ මිනිස්සුන්ට AC සාමාන්‍යයෙන් හුලං එන්න තැනක්වත් තියනවාද? මේ මිනිස්සු තැම්බි ජීවත් වෙන්න ඕනේ. මේ විදුලිය කපන්න අරන් දැන් මං හිතන්නේ මාස 3කට වැඩි. පාන්දර සමහරක් වෙලාවට පාන්දර මහත්තයා කියන්නේ දැන් අපි ඇවිල්ලා පාන්දර නිදියන් ඉන්නකොට පාන්දර 4ටත් කරන්ට් එක යන වෙලාවල් තියෙනවා. එතකොට කිරිසප්පෙක් කොහොමද නිදිය ගන්නේ? මෙවැනි නිවෙස් වල ඉන්න මිනිස්සු ඇත්තටම මේ රස්නෙත් එක්ක ජීවත් වෙන්නේ බොහොම අමාරුයි. ඉතින් එතකොට කරන්ට් එක නැති වුණා කියන්නේ ෆෑන් එකක්වත් වැඩ කරන්නේ නැත්.
Surviving is a daily struggle for Gayan and his family following the nation's economic meltdown. Prices of essential items such as rice, vegetables, milk, and even medicine have risen steeply. Now, Gayan and his wife are neck deep in debt. Private moneylenders are harassing them. Gayan doesn't know how he can even buy medicine for his daughter.
කෙල්ලට බෙහෙත් ගන්න ගියාද?
නෑ අද සල්ලි මදි වුණානේ යන්න.
දැන් මොකද උන්න තත්ත්වේ?
ටික ටික අඩු වෙනවා. බලමු හෙට වෙනකම් බලමු.
හෙට බලමු හෙට වෙද්දී අඩු වුණත් අයම් බලන්න.
Sadly, Gayan is not alone in this precarious state of existence. Millions of poor people, even those from the middle class, have been pushed to the edge as Sri Lanka's economy suffered a meltdown in March. The country is now facing bankruptcy, suspending payments on foreign loans that total over $51 billion. About $8.6 billion is due this year. Experts say the major cause behind the crisis is the ballooning fiscal deficit combined with the current account deficit. As foreign exchange reserves vanished, the country ran out of money to pay for essential commodities such as fuel, fertilizers, and even medicine. Leaders and observers agree that the country hasn't seen any crisis like this ever.
This certainly is the worst economic crisis we have faced during this century and last century. Beyond that, the debate is whether the coffee blight, which resulted in the total collapse of the Sri Lankan economy at that time, was worse than this, or whether this crisis is worse than the coffee blight. I would say coffee blight was the single source of foreign earnings for us, and it did create a big impact, but this is far more. This is a complete economy, a global economy. We are tied to the global economy, and the damage here, in my view, is far more than the coffee blight which took place in the latter part of the 19th century.
This is what I would call a crisis of governance, which has an economic dimension as well as a political dimension. In all of those three aspects, it is definitely the worst. And the reason for it is this, is that the Rajapaksas did not create the economic crisis, nor did they create the political crisis. But what has happened is that their lack of capacity to govern, their profligacy with regard to spending, their heartlessness with regard to the popular opinion and the sentiments and concerns of the people.
The future looks bleak for millions as the nation struggles to deal with its bankruptcy. Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and his cabinet have now resigned. A new interim government under UNP leader Ranil Wickremasinghe has taken over. But tension is rising on the streets as shortages of essential items become acute. As the crisis deepens, the pain is increasingly felt far and wide. Even in the tea industry, one of the country's biggest foreign exchange earners, the situation is dismal. There's not enough tea production and workers are starving. How long will it take for the nation to come out of this enveloping darkness? Kandy, in the central province, is famous for its temple of the tooth relic. It's one of the most sacred shrines in the Buddhist world and a World Heritage Site. The city is also known for its tea grown in the hills surrounding the plateau. There are scores of plantations, big and small, in the picturesque hills that produce some of the best quality tea sold in the markets the world over. Tens of thousands of workers have worked in the gardens for decades in the smaller tea estates. One of them is 62-year-old S. Waliyama, whose life took a turn for the worse when the government imposed a sudden ban on chemical fertilizers in April last year. Tea output fell dramatically since only organic fertilizers were allowed. Waliyama can now pluck fewer leaves each day, earning much less than before. She doesn't understand why her simple life is falling apart.
அரசாங்கம் வந்ததுலன்ட்டு எங்களுக்கு இந்த கஷ்ட நிலைமையாக இருக்குது. நாங்கள் இப்போ எல்லாம் இந்த நாள் அவிச்சு சாப்பிட இயலாது.
என்ன செய்ய ஒரு
நாள் வேலை செஞ்சு இப்படியே பட்னியாக இருக்க இயலாது. பிள்ளைகளுக்கு தேத்தனி மாவு கூட இல்லை, பால் மாவு கூட இல்லை. ஸ்கூலுக்கு போகிறதுக்கு 7 கட்ட தூரம் சாப்பாடு இல்லாமல் கஷ்டப்பட்டு வேலை செஞ்சுட்டோம்னு நாங்கள் பட்னியாகவே இருக்க நிலைமை ஆயிடுச்சு.
For 50 years, Waliyama has led a hard and disciplined life, getting up at 6 in the morning and then working in the gardens for a couple of hours. Then again, after a lunch break, she worked for 3 hours, plucking around 35 kilograms of tea leaves a day. With crop yields falling, she can only pluck 10 kilos now and is paid far less.
கிழமைக்கு 2 நாள் 3 நாள் வேலை செய்யணும். உரம் இல்லை, கொழுந்து இல்லை, பில்லு உரம் இல்லாதனால எங்களுக்கு கொழுந்து குறவு, வேலையும் குறவு. சாப்பாட்டு கூட இப்போ வழியில் நிலமையில் இருக்கும். எவ்வளோ உழைச்சி வேலை இல்லை. 10 ரூபா சல்லி மிச்சப்படுதில்லை. சரியான கஷ்டத்தில் தான் இருக்கும் பெலாக்காயும் அது இதாக வச்சு சாப்பிட்டுக்கிட்டு.
The 5-acre estate where Waliama works employs around 10 to 15 workers in a typical season. These small estates form the backbone of the country's tea industry, producing around 70% of the output. Now, these small plantations are struggling to survive. 54-year-old smallholding owner Sanath Waligala admits the workers are suffering since output has fallen and he cannot employ them every day of the week.
අපට ලැබෙන ආදායම් ප්‍රමාණය අඩු නිසා අපට වැඩි ශ්‍රමයක් ලබා ගන්න බැරිලා තියෙනවා. අපට හැමදාම මිනිස්සුන්ට වැඩ දෙන්න ගියොත් අපට ජීවත් වෙන්න විදියක් නැති වෙලා තියෙනවා. වෙනදා 10 දෙනෙක් ගත්තන අද අපට ගන්න වෙලා තියෙන්නේ දෙන්නයි. එතකොට ඒ ගන්න 10 දෙනෙක් ගත්තා කියලා කියන්නේ ඒගොල්ලන්ට සරලන පඩයක් අපි දෙන්න ඕනි. නමුත් අපට වැටුපක් ගෙවා ගන්න විදියක් නැහැ. අපි ඒගොල්ලන්ට හරි වැටුපක් දින දුන්නේ නැහැ කියලා කියන්නේ ඒගොල්ලන්ට ජීවත් වෙන්න බෑ. ඒගොල්ලෝ ලොකු අසීරුතාවක් කියන්නේ ඒගොල්ලෝ ලොකු අසරණකමකින් ඉන්නේ. කොගා ලොකු ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ තියෙන බඩු මිලත් එක්ක ජීවන වියදමත් එක්ක ඒගොල්ලෝ ගොඩක්ම අසරණ වෙලා ඉන්නේ.
The sudden decision to switch from chemical to organic fertilizers hit the output of all crops, including tea, hard. Tea is one of the country's primary foreign exchange earners, accounting for about 10% of total exports or $1.2 billion a year. But the fertilizer ban dealt a severe blow to the industry that was already facing stiff competition from other exporting nations. Even though the government made a U-turn late last year, the damage to crops was already done. Many experts think the tea output might even fall by 30 to 40% in 2022, pushing a majority of workers to the brink of starvation.
Cash crops like tea. It's a double squeeze because precisely at the time when we don't have foreign exchange to import produce like rice and vegetables, we have undermined agricultural production. So with this move, we've reduced the foreign earnings from tea, and we have also been now forced to import rice into the country, in a country which was more or less self-sufficient in rice production.
The idea that we should move overnight from chemical fertilizer to organic fertilizer was not because of any great love for the environment. I think it was meant to change the foreign exchange situation, to save on foreign exchange.
The deepening economic crisis has been caused by a combination of factors, the main reason being that the country has been living beyond its means for many years. Then, COVID struck in 2020, and all the foreign exchange earnings fell since a large part of foreign exchange basket is made up of remittances, tourism, and the export of traditional agricultural products such as tea and rubber. In 2019, tourism had already taken a hit following the Easter church bombings. But even though foreign currency inflows plummeted, the government kept borrowing from international capital markets by issuing international sovereign bonds or ISBs.
Now, what are we investing them in? We invested it in the Lotus Tower, we invested in highways. What have been the returns from all of this investment? That's the big question, because if we don't have adequate returns, then there's no way to pay back these international loans, which are dollar denominated loans. So that's where the problem starts. If it was domestic borrowing to be able to stimulate the economy, that's under our control. But when it's international loans, our debt stock increases, and we are now in a position where we can't even import goods because our foreign reserves have declined to such an extent.
To compound the problem, as a part of fulfilling the ruling party's election pledges, the Rajapaksa government provided massive tax reliefs in 2019. Sri Lanka's tax-to-GDP ratio plunged to 8.4%, unleashing a perfect storm of fiscal and current account deficits. And then, international fuel prices soared following the Ukraine war, scooping out the bottom of the foreign exchange basket.
Many of us were warning that we are headed towards a very serious debt crisis. By 2019, the conditions were already there. And when this government came to power, when President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was elected, the first thing he did was to cut taxes. So our revenues dropped by a third. And then by March 2020, with the pandemic, it was amply clear to all of us that we were heading towards a very serious crisis very quickly.
Surprisingly enough, COVID wasn't a death blow to Sanath and the tea workers in Gampola. Output remained steady and there was a constant supply of electricity to run the factories. But a suicidal ban on chemical fertilizers destroyed their lives and livelihoods.
කොවිඩ් නිසා අපේ තේවලට එච්චර බලපෑමක් ආවේ නැහැ. මොකද කොවිඩ් තිබ්බත් අපි තේ දළු නෙළුවා. අපිට ඒකදී ලොකු දෙයක් වුණේ නැහැ. අපිට ප්‍රධානම හේතුව මේ තේවලට වුණු පළවෙනිම හානිය තමයි රසායනික පොහොර සහ වල්නාශක. මෙන්න මේ දෙකට තමයි අපි බිම දැම්මේ. ද කොවිඩ් කියන එකේදී අපි අපේ ආදායම මේ විදිහටම කරගෙන ගියානේ. ඒක අපිට එච්චර මහා ලොකු දෙයක් තිබ්බේ නැහනේ. අපි දළු කැඩුවා, ෆැක්ටරි වලින් දළු ගත්තා. එතකොට ෆැක්ටරි වලට දළු අඹරන්න ඒගොල්ලෝගේ මේ කරන්ට් එක තිබුණා. කරන්ට් කපනවා කියලා ඉවරලා මේ ජෙනරේටර් දුවනවා කියලා ඉවරලා ඩීසල් ප්‍රශ්නයක් තිබ්බේ නැහැ. ඉතින් ඩීසල් දැන් ට්‍රාන්ස්පෝර්ට් අපිට දළු ගෙනියන ට්‍රාන්ස්පෝර්ට් එකත් ඉස්සර රුපියල් 2 කිලෝ එකකට කපන්නේ. නමුත් ඒකත් වැඩි වෙලා තියෙනවා.
Tea worker Walyama is in total despair. She cannot even give enough food to the children in the family.
ஒரு நேரம் சாப்பிட்டு இப்படி தான் பட்னியாக கண்டு வேலை செய்ய பேலாக்கையும் அதை தான் வச்சு சாப்பிட்டுக்கிட்டு தான் இருக்கணும். பெனடல் வாங்க கூட சல்லி இல்லை. ஸ்கூல் போகிற பிள்ளைகளுக்கு கூட ஒழுங்காக சாப்பாடு இல்லை. ஒரு நேரம் சாப்பிட்டு பட்னியாக போய் ஸ்கூல் படிச்சுட்டு வருதுங்க. எங்கள் குடும்பத்தில் எல்லாத்தையும் கஷ்டத்தில் தான் விழுந்துருக்காங்க. சாப்பாடு கூட இல்லாத நிலைமையில் இருக்காங்க.
It's not just tea workers who are in dire straits. Paddy and vegetable farmers in the country's deep south are also on the brink of starvation. They had all voted for the ruling family in 2019. Now they are driving out their leaders even from their hometown. But will the cabinet's mere resignation solve the crisis, deepening each passing day? A home ground turns into a battleground. A family home becomes a no-go zone for the family. Tangal, in Hambantota district, the bastion of the Rajapakses in the country's deep down south, looks an entirely different place today than what it was just a few months ago. Even in January, it would have been difficult, if not impossible, to find anyone in the district who would speak against the Rajapaksa family. But now, the mood has undergone a sea change. Last month, hundreds of local students marched towards the Rajapaksa ancestral home, shouting, "Go, Gota, go!" against President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. A few days ago, protesters set fire to one house next to the Rajapaksa home, and Mahinda Rajapaksa and his family were evacuated to an unknown location. What went terribly wrong so fast for the family? In the small town of Suriyawewa, 180 kilometers from Colombo, 52-year-old Karuna Jayanti has had a life of struggle for many years. As farmers in one of the poorest districts in the country, Karuna and her husband, Saman Priyantha, never had it easy. They own a small plot of land in Surya Wewa where they grow paddy and vegetables. They frequently suffer from wild elephant attacks that destroy the crops, despite the high-voltage electric fence set up to check the menace. But even then, Karuna has never encountered a scenario as bad as the one prevailing now.
අපිට ඒ වෙනකොට අපේ ජනතාව කීප දෙනෙක්ම මම හිතන්නේ මේ වෙනකොට අපේ ගමේ කීප දෙනෙක්ම අලිගහ මරලා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් ඒ වගේ අපි ගොඩාක්ම දුක් විඳ කාලයක් තිබුණා. ඒ වුණත් මෙවන් දුකක් අපි විඳේ නැහැ.
2-year-old Karuna and her husband usually grow paddy during the main crop growing season known as the Maha or the long season. In the Yala or the short season, they grow mostly vegetables and paddy. But their crop output was ruined when the government suddenly announced a total ban on chemical fertilizers last year. Switching to organic fertilizers was difficult since there was not enough supply.
ඇත්තටම කාබනික පොහොර අපි නරකයි කියනවා නෙවෙයි. ඒක අපිට මේ ඉක්මනින්ම මේක කරලා දීපේක වැරදි. ඒ කියන්නේ අනිත් පොහොරත් එක්ක යන්න තිබුණා ගමනක් තිබුණා නම් මීට වැඩිය හොඳ තැනකට අපිට යන්න තිබුණා. ඒ නැතුව එකම වරට මේ පොහොර නවත්තලා මේ කාබනික දාලා හදනවා කියලා එහෙම භෝගයක් අපිට හදා ගන්න නම් මේ තරම් තත්ත්වෙට අපිට බැරි වුණා. අපි අන්තිම තත්ත්වයට වැටුනේ ඔන්න ඔය කාබනික පොහොර නිසා තමයි.
Now, the government has made a U-turn, allowing chemical fertilizers in, but the farmers are having the worst of both worlds. A 50-kilo bag of chemical fertilizers that cost 4,000 rupees 3 years ago is now priced at 40,000 rupees in the open market. The black market rates are much higher. Karuna's husband, Saman Priyantha, says it's even more difficult to grow vegetables than paddy using organic fertilizers, and the situation is bleak.
එලෝලු කීර වර්ග හදන්නම අමාරුයි. වී ගොයිතට වැඩි අමාරුයි එලෝලු හදන කාබනික පොහොර වලින්. මොකද මුල් පුස් කෑම එනවා, කහලෙඩ එනවා. ඒවට ගහන්න ඉසියාකාර පොහොර නැහැ වෙලඳ පොලේ ගන්න. ගත්තත් ඒව දාස් ගණන් එකට එකක් මිල වැඩි. ඒ හින්දා හදන්න බෑ. ඒක හදාගත්ත ගෙඩිය ගැටමල වුණත් දෙන්න බෑ වෙලඳ පොලක් නැහැ හරියට. රටේ ඩීසල් නැහැ, පෙට්‍රල් නැහැ, වාහන වෙලඳෙක් එන්නේ නැහැ. මම දැන් අදත් අර කිතල කෑලි වගේක් අර කපලා තුට්ටුවට දීලා මේ පාඩුවේ මේ ඇවිල්ලා තමයි දැන් මේ ගෙදර මේ ඉන්නේ.
Today, Karuna is cooking plain rice for their meal.
නෝන මක්ක උවිලා තියෙන්නේ.
ඕන තිබුණු අන්තිම හාල්ඩින්ග ලිපෙන් තියුවා. ඒට අනිද්දානම් ඉතින් මොනවා කන්න වෙයිද නම් දන්නේ නැහැ.
අනේ ඉතින් අපි මොන වරදක් කරාටද ඉතින් මේ නේ?
අනේ ඉතින් කාට කියන්නද මේ දුක?
මොකද කරන්නේ ඉතින් ලුයිපතුයි තමයි කන්න මේ.
මොනවත් කන්න ඉතින් හාල් ගන්න සල්ලි තියෙන්න එපා.
There's a little scrapped coconut left from the previous day. They can have only rice with coconut and pickles. Observers believe the fertilizer fiasco has dealt a crippling blow to farmers that will have a long-lasting impact on the country's food security situation. The prices of foodstuff and essential items have risen sharply, and it's not clear when the economy can be put back on track.
No, there was a demand for organic fertilizer. I felt that it has to be built up over time. We sorted it out by giving people a voucher with a value included, that was the value of the subsidy. So you are free to buy whichever type of fertilizer you wanted. The wizards thought that we can save foreign exchange if we don't import fertilizer. So instead of having organic fertilizer over 10 years, some of them came up with the idea, let's go fully organic now. That's why they couldn't change the policy.
Clearly a man-made disaster. Imagine like a truck full of vegetables going at 100 kilometers per hour and you shoot one of the tires. That's what they did. In other words, there was a crash. And not only, you can't just replace the tire now and hope the agriculture sector is going to start moving. The whole truck has crashed. Now we are in that kind of a situation. So it was a very disastrous policy because agricultural yields have dropped dramatically.
Life has been turned upside down for Saman and Karuna. In a matter of months, they have been pushed to the brink of starvation. They worry they might now have to sell the tiny house they had built through a life of hard work.
දැන් මට දැන් අවුරුදු 47ක් වෙන්න ඇවිල්ලා තියෙනවා. ඒ 47න් 46ක්ම බොහොම ලස්සන රටේ ලෝකෙට ණය තුරස් නැතු. ඔය දැන් බයික් කරගෙන කුඹුරු පිටි හදාගෙන, හරකබාන හදාගෙන, ගේ දොර හදාගන්න තරම් මට්ටමට ගෙනල්ලා අපි ජීවත් වුණා. දැන් ඒ තියෙනගේ කඩලා විකුණන තරම් තත්ත්වයකට තමයි අත්පත් වෙලා මේ තියෙන්නේ.
They are coming quite close to the poverty line, and the number of people on the poverty line, under the poverty line, is increasing. That is the impact, because you find, well, bulk of your money will go on for food. So the question is, are you going to have 3 meals a day or 2 meals? Then you are traveling, your cost. So even if you are a farmer who has who grows his own items of food, still the cost of living in all other items have gone up. So this is going to be a big issue for everyone.
Like many others in the poor district, Saman now wants all the Rajapaksas to go.
රාජපක්ෂ පවුල කියන්නේ අපේ මේ හම්බන්තොට දිස්ත්‍රික්කෙම කට්ටිය බොහොම ලෙන්ගතුකමින් ඡන්දය දුන්නා. ඒගොල්ලෝ මේ ගම් රටවල් වලට ඇවිල්ලා ආව ගියා බැලුව හෙව්වා. යාගර කුරක්කම් සාක්ෂණය කියලා පටියක් හිටම් පාලදගෙන තිබුණ හම්බන්තොට දිස්ත්‍රික්කේ වෙනුවෙන්. ඉතින් ඇත්තටම කියනවා නම් දැන් මුළු රටම කියන්නේ රාජපක්ෂ පවුල අපට එපා කියන තැන. මොකද මිනිසුන්ට ඒ තරම් හානි වෙලා තියෙනවා.
The distress in the Rajapaksa hometown is quite apparent. There are hardly any farmers in the fields, since many do not have the means to continue farming. What is also visible are the mega infrastructure projects built with funding from China. They remain mostly unused and unprofitable. A highway without much traffic, a port that doesn't generate much revenue. Even in Colombo, the billion-dollar Colombo Port City project, an artificial 665-acre island, was aimed at turning the area into a financial hub like Dubai. These neglected mega projects now stand witness to the last government's profligacy and extravaganza.
අත්තර මහත්තෝ මේ කුසුකමාන්ත රටේදී අපට හයිවේ එක අවශ්‍ය නැත. අපට බෝල ගහන්න අවශ්‍ය නැහැ. එතකොට අපට එයාර්පෝර්ට්ස් ඕනේ අපි රටට යන්න නැහැනේ.
Though China now accounts for 10% of the country's foreign debt, experts think the country cannot be blamed for the present crisis, since the previous Sri Lankan government itself invited Beijing to invest heavily in the ill-considered infrastructure projects.
In the case of China, our main issue was the Hambantota Harbour, where financial viability had not been checked. We looked at it and we want to dispose of it. China asked for the first bid, and we got an offer of $1 billion from China merchants. We didn't think we could get $1 billion for that harbour from anyone else, because it was a loss-making harbour. That $1 billion went into our reserves. So but the port, I must say, has improved now. Our idea was that this could be a port which could link to the other China-built ports in the Indian Ocean. But that's going on, so that's no longer a problem.
10% of our debt is from China at a lower rate. So we can't say that we are in a debt trap because of China. But what happened was that Chinese money was used for unproductive projects.
The economic crisis has now morphed into a political crisis. Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has resigned. A new interim government is in place. But can it stem the tide of public anger and put the economy back on track?
කෙසේ වුවත් ඉදිරි මාස කීපය ඔබට මට ජීවිතයේ දුෂ්කරම කාල පරිච්ඡේදය ගත කරන්නට සිදු වේවි. එයට අපි සියල්ලෝම කැපවීමෙන් මුහුණ දිය යුතුය. ඒ සඳහා ගතවන මාස කීපය අපට ඉවසීමෙන් දරා ගන්නට ඉන්නම වෙනවා. නමුත් අපිට මේකෙන් ගොඩ යන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ සඳහා අපිට අලුත් මාර්ගයක යන්න වෙනවා.
The Lord's blessings are indeed needed, especially now when the nation is in the throes of its worst economic crisis in its history. Veteran politician Ranil Wickremasinghe has assumed office at a time when the economic ship of the country is sinking fast. There are acute shortages of food and fuel. Public anger is growing. Though Mahinda Rajapaksa and his government have resigned, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa hasn't given up his powers yet. But many wanted the entire Rajapaksa clan to pack up and leave. One of them is 29-year-old protest leader Vimukti Dushanta, who has been at the forefront of the protests from the beginning. Vimukti is a digital and media content professional who has worked on World Bank-assisted projects. Still, he and his friends believe they had to go out onto the streets to stem the rot.
ඒක ඇත්තටම ආරම්භ වෙන්න හේතු වුණේ ඒ වෙලාවේ අපි දැක්ක මේ රටේ මතුවලා තිබ්බ ආර්ථික අර්බුදය සමාජ අර්බුදයක් බවට පත් වෙමින් දේශපාලන අර්බුදයක් කරා ගමන් කරමින් තිබෙන බව අපි දැක්කා. විශේෂයෙන් වර්තමාන ජනාධිපතිවරයා බලයට පත් වුණාට පස්සේ ආර්ථිකය සම්බන්ධව ඔහු ගත්ත අදූරදර්ශී තීන්දුව සහ සමහර තීන්දුව නොගැනීම කල්ගත කිරීම හින්දා ඇතිවෙච්ච ආර්ථික අර්බුදයේ හින්දා සමාජයට දැඩි පීඩනයක් එන්න ලැබෙන බව අපිට දකින්න තිබුණා. ඉතින් අපේ උත්සාහය උනේ මේක දේශපාලන අර්බුදයක් කරා යන්න කලින් වළක්වා ගන්න හැකි වේද කියන ආරම්භක අදහසෙන් තමයි අපි තරුණයෝ කීප දෙනෙක් එකතු වෙලා මේක ආරම්භ කරේ.
Vimukti is standing with his friends even now, asking the president to step down.
දිලියෝ මේ සටන අපි ඉදිරියට කරා යනවා ජනාධිපතිතුමා ඉල්ලා අස්වන තුරු ඒක ඉක්මන් කරන්න අවශ්‍ය කරන කටයුතු වලටත් අපි යනවා. ඒ වගේම මේ වෙනකොට ජනාධිපතිවරයාගේ ධූරයේ දැරීම සම්බන්ධයෙන් මතුවලා තියෙන ප්‍රශ්න කිහිපයක් තියෙනවා. ඒ සම්බන්ධයෙන් අපි මේ වෙනකොට කටයුතු හොයා බලමින් ඉන්නවා. නීතිමය ක්‍රියාමාර්ග වලට යන්න පුළුවන්ද කියන කාරණා එක්ක මම හිතන්නේ මේ සටන ජනාධිපතිවරයා ඉවත් වෙන තුරු හෝ ඉවත් කරන තුරු ඉස්සරහටම යනවා. Government has mismanaged the economy and they ruin our life and this country.
The new government has its hands full. It must first negotiate a bailout package from the IMF. That may take a few months. But the IMF demands structural reforms that might increase the sufferings and hardships of the poor and ordinary people. Can the government strengthen its social safety net before implementing the IMF reforms?
The rupee is depreciating fast. There are no foreign exchange reserves to back it up. So we have to do it in that background. We have to do the adjustments. Then let's look at the other recommendation of the IMF that we must look at the vulnerable groups. So let's do the reforms and then look at what are the price adjustments reforms that have to be done. Stretch it over a period of time, but at the same time ensure that we can give relief to the people. So we have to stop all unnecessary expenditure, what is called unnecessary infrastructure development, put all that money into the relief program.
First of all, first thing, completely rebuild the credibility of Sri Lanka in the eyes of the international community. Today we cannot go for ISB or we cannot go for financial listing because the credibility is gone, it's zero. We have none of the rating agencies will back us. Without the backing of the rating agencies, we cannot take ISBs or international securities. To do that, we have to then work with somebody like IMF. And there, we have to take tough decisions. And these tough decisions are not really going to harm the people of this country. In fact, in my opinion, these tough decisions will improve the life of these people.
We have to go to the IMF. We have to get the bridging finance and then we have to implement an IMF program. I have said so, the current finance minister has said so. You need a government with the credibility and trust and who the people have confidence in to come out and tell them, look, we have to take more bitter medicine. We have to pay with pain in order to put ourselves back on a trajectory of growth. Now, if they don't do that, if we don't have a government that can do that, you're going to have people coming out into the streets and you'll have rioting.
The spectre of riots is haunting Sri Lanka as time runs out for the new government. Those who are on edge see darkness all around. In the southern town of Hambantota, paddy farmer Saman Priyantha doesn't even get 2 square meals a day. He doesn't know what tomorrow holds for him.
ගොවියට මොන පැත්තකටවත් දැන් කරන්න කියන දෙයක් නැහැ. බැංකු වලට ණයයි, රටට 110ට පොලියට ගනිපු ණයයි, ඒව ගෙවන්න විදියක් නැහැ. ඒ අපි ගනිපු කට්ටිය ආවිලා අපේ මුදල් ඉල්ලනවා, ගෙවා ගන්න විදියක් නැහැ. සමහර කට්ටිය වසබනවා. සමහර කට්ටිය පෞල් ජීවිත අසාර්ථක වෙලා බැහැවැටලා යනවා. රටේ ලෝකෙ කිසිම කුලියක් මලියක් නැහැ. ජීවත් වෙන්නේ කියන මොනම පැත්තකමවත් කිසිම තරකමවත් කිසිම ආදායයක් නැහැ. රජේනුත් නැහැ.
The same tale of deprivation is repeated in the capital, Colombo, too. 3-wheeler driver Gayan Palitha is in utter despair.
ඒක තමයි දැන් මේ යන ආර්ථික තත්ත්වය අනුව මම නම් හිතන්නේ අපිට ගොඩ යාමක් දියේ කියලා. කවදා හරි දවසක ඉතින් කියන්න බෑ මොනවා වේද කියලා. ජීවිතේදී ගෙවා ගන්න බැරි වුණොත් අපිට තියෙන්නේ ඉතින් දිවිනසා ගන්න තමයි. වෙන කරන්න දෙයක් නැහැ අත්‍තරම.
The immediate future looks bleak for even small tea estate owner Sanath Waligala. A year ago, Sanath would have been considered among those in the middle class or even in a higher rung. Now, even Sanath is fighting a grim battle for survival with nothing to look forward to.
අපට අපේ දරුවන්ගේ අනාගතය ගැන විශාල බයක් තියෙනවා. අපිට තීරණය කරන්න බැරිලා තියෙනවා. අපේ දරුවෝ දැන් ඉන්නේ රට අතහැරලා යමු කියන තැනක. විශේෂයෙන් අපේ දරුවෝ නිතරම අපට කියන්නේ මේ රටේ ජීවත් වෙන්න පුළුවන් රටක් නෙමෙයි. අපි මේ රට අතහැරලා යමු. අපි මේ රට අතහැරලා කොහාටද යන්නේ? අපි මේ රට අතහැරලා කොහමද යන්නේ? අපට ඒක කරන්න පුළුවන්ද? අපට ඒක කරන්න බෑ. ඒ නිසා අපේ දරුවන්ගේ අනාගතය ගැන අපට සමස්තයක් වශයෙන් අප සෑම සියලු දෙනාටම විශාල බයක් තියෙනවා.
The lives of 22 million people are on a knife edge. Blackouts, even in Colombo, continue for hours. Long queues are still forming outside petrol kiosks. And the full impact of crop failures is likely to be felt in about a month's time.
We are looking at famine type of conditions and we have to really take urgent steps to address it. Food security is in jeopardy. And in the years ahead, we might even be facing famine type of conditions.
We are staring at a food security crisis. It's already happened. I mean, I don't think many people in this country are having 3 square meals a day. There is, even if the food is available from the point at which it is produced, getting it to the marketplace is problematic because of the fuel crisis and the fuel shortage. You know, so it's impacting in different directions. Yeah, we might come to a point where people in this country could face starvation for the first time in our history.
Prime Minister Wickremasinghe has taken up an unenviable task that may become a poison chalice. His party broke up into different factions over the last few years, and he was about to walk into political retirement. But destiny had other designs. Wickremasinghe couldn't refuse to accept the job in his country's darkest hour of need. Will he have political support to carry out a mission impossible?
This situation, perversely, must be turned into a catalyst for change. We cannot live in fear or in despair. We have to live in hope. We have to believe that things get better, and they will get better. It'll take time though. As I said to you, for us to get where we want to, where I think we should get to, put ourselves back on a trajectory of growth, it'll take 5 years at the very least.
Unfortunately, I had to answer that question very pessimistically. It will get worse. In the short term, it will get worse. There's no way that it can get better in the short term.
මේ අභියෝගය මම බාරගන්නේ රට වෙනුවෙන්. මගේ අරමුණ සහ කැපවීම පුද්ගලයෙක් පවුලක් හෝ කණ්ඩායමක් බේරා ගැනීම නෙවෙයි. මුළු රටේම ජනතාව බේරා ගැනීම. මුළු රටම බේරා ගැනීම. තරුණ පරපුරේ අනාගතය බේරා ගැනීම. ජීවිතය පරදුවට තබා මම මේ අභියෝගයට මුහුණ දෙනවා. ඒ අභියෝගය ජය ගන්නවා.